Hello, curious minds. Welcome to this intellectual journey. Today we're going to open a book that many prefer to keep shut, one that tells an uncomfortable truth about the modern world. Have you ever felt that behind the stories of progress and success, something darker lurks? Well, you're not alone. Over a century ago, while the world celebrated the marvels of the industrial age, with its steam trains and towering factories, a group of writers decided to turn their pens to the shadows, to what no one wanted to see. They dared to tell the truth, raw and unadorned. And what they found changed literature forever. Brace yourselves, because we're about to uncover how realism and naturalism became society's most unflinching mirror. A tool so powerful that its echoes still resonate in the stories we consume today, from the grittiest series to the bravest investigative journalism. Before we begin, I wanted to tell you something about the images you're seeing. To bring this narration to life, I've used artificial intelligence tools to generate them. So think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and atmosphere of what I'm telling you. They won't always be an exact or literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to let your imagination soar with me. I truly hope you enjoy it. To understand this literary revolution, we first need to travel back to the 19th century. Imagine the scene. European cities were growing at a dizzying pace. Gas lights, steam engines, the promise of a new era of prosperity for all. At least that was the official narrative. But if you looked closer, the reality was very different. Behind the elegant facades of the bourgeoisie, entire neighborhoods were plunged into squalor. Progress came at an enormous human cost, and that cost was paid by the workers, women, and children in the factories. The literature that dominated until then, Romanticism, was no longer fit for purpose. Its stories of passionate heroes, castles, and impossible loves sounded like a hollow fairy tale against the harshness of everyday life. People no longer needed to escape, they needed to understand. They needed someone to tell their story. And so, almost as an inevitable response, realism was born. Its goal was radically simple, yet incredibly ambitious: to portray life as it was, without idealizing it. Writers became a kind of photographer of social reality, using words instead of a camera. Authors like Honoré de Balzac in France set themselves a monumental task: to create what he called the human comedy, a series of novels intended to document every corner of French society, from the richest banker to the poorest worker. No one was left out of the picture. In England, Charles Dickens, though still with romantic touches, didn't hesitate to show the brutality of orphanages, child exploitation, and institutional hypocrisy. His novels were a direct blow to the conscience of Victorian society. Think about it, he was a true social activist with a pen. Realism obsessed over detail. Descriptions were meticulous, almost scientific. They wanted the reader to be able to smell the factory smoke, feel the cold of an unheated apartment, hear the incessant murmur of the city. The idea was to create total immersion in reality. The protagonists were no longer princes or knights. They were village doctors, frustrated housewives, drab office workers, ordinary people with recognizable problems and ambitions. For the first time, millions of people could see themselves reflected in the pages of a book. Their lives mattered. One of the pinnacle works that encapsulates this is Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary. It's the story of Emma, a woman trapped in a boring marriage and a provincial life who seeks escape through romantic fantasies and adultery. Her tragedy is the tragedy of dreams shattered by a mediocre reality. Flaubert was so obsessive about precision that his motto was to find le mot juste, the exact word. He didn't just want to tell a story, he wanted to build a world so real that the reader couldn't distinguish fiction from reality, the work of an architect of words. But just as the public was getting used to this mirror of reality, some writers felt it wasn't enough. They believed realism was too polite, too timid. They felt the need to go a step further, to lift the rug and expose all the dirt underneath. Thus, naturalism was born. If realism is a photographer, naturalism is a forensic pathologist. It doesn't just want to show reality, it wants to dissect it, analyze its causes, and show its rawest consequences, no matter how unpleasant. It sought to apply the scientific method to literature. The father of this movement was the French writer Émile Zola. He was fascinated by the new scientific theories of his time, such as Darwin's theory of evolution and early studies on genetics. And he asked a frightening question: what if human beings aren't as free as we think? Naturalism is based on an idea called determinism. It's the concept that our destiny is strongly influenced or even determined by three factors: heredity, that is, the genes and predispositions we inherit from our parents, the environment in which we grow up, and the historical moment we happen to live in. For Zola, the novel was a laboratory. He would take a character with a certain genetic heritage, place them in a miserable environment, and observe how the experiment unfolded. His protagonists often have no escape. They are victims of forces they cannot control, such as alcoholism, poverty, or violence. His grand project was a series of 20 novels, Les Rougon-Macquart, where he follows the history of a family across several generations. In each book, he explores how the family's flaws, such as alcoholism or madness, manifest in different environments, from coal mines to the grand department stores of Paris. One of his most famous and brutal novels is The Dram Shop, L'Assommoir. It recounts the downfall of a laundress named Gervaise into alcoholism, dragged down by the misery of her surroundings and her husband's weakness. Zola doesn't judge, he simply shows the social machinery that grinds her down. It's a devastating read. Germinal, another of his masterpieces, plunges us into the hell of the coal mines in northern France. It describes with suffocating detail the inhumane conditions of the miners, their struggle, and their rebellion. You can almost feel the coal dust in your lungs when you read it. As you can imagine, this was an absolute scandal. Bourgeois society, which preferred to read uplifting stories, accused Zola and the naturalists of being vulgar, of wallowing in the sordid. But their aim was not to provoke for provocation's sake. Their aim was the truth, no matter how ugly. They believed that by exposing society's ailments, they could help cure them. Naturalism at its core had a deep social calling. It was a cry of alarm. A look at this, we can't keep ignoring it. A form of activism through the most stark art. Now, this literary earthquake wasn't confined to France alone. The idea of using literature as a scalpel to examine society spread like wildfire across the globe. And in each place, it adopted a unique form, responding to its own wounds and conflicts. Let's cross the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the country was experiencing its own version of unbridled industrialization. Economic growth for a few and brutal conditions for the majority. The perfect scenario for naturalism. Here, naturalism's determinism met a very American idea, that of the frontier and man's struggle against unforgiving nature. Jack London, in stories like To Build a Fire, shows an insignificant human being against the majesty and deadly indifference of the Alaskan cold. It's not Zola's social environment that destroys man, but nature in its purest and wildest state. The struggle for survival becomes the central theme. Civilization is just a thin veneer that easily cracks, revealing the animal within us. Other authors like Stephen Crane in Maggie, a Girl of the Streets, or Theodore Dreiser in An American Tragedy, applied Zola's formula to American cities, showing how dreams of success and happiness crashed against a wall of poverty and social determinism. And now let's travel east, to vast and tumultuous 19th century Russia. Russian realism is a giant in its own right. Here, the mirror not only turned towards society, but also inwards, towards the darkest and most complex depths of the human soul. We're talking about Fyodor Dostoevsky. In novels like Crime and Punishment, we don't just see the poverty of St. Petersburg, we fully immerse ourselves in the tortured mind of his protagonist, Raskolnikov. We feel his anguish, his arrogance, his guilt. It is psychological realism. Dostoevsky explored great philosophical questions through his characters. Does God exist? If there is no God, is everything permitted? What is morality? His books are a battleground of ideas embodied in desperate characters struggling to find meaning in their existence. On the other hand, we have Leo Tolstoy. In War and Peace, he paints a sweeping panorama of Russian society during the Napoleonic Wars. But in Anna Karenina, he creates a realistic and devastating portrait of a woman trapped by social conventions, similar to Madame Bovary, but on an epic scale. Russian realism is profound, philosophical, and spiritual. It asks not only how we live, but why we live. It combines social critique with a relentless quest for the soul, creating some of the most powerful works in universal literature. And this echo also reached Spain. Authors like Benito Pérez Galdós in his national episodes and novels like Fortunata and Jacinta masterfully portrayed the complex Madrilenian society of the 19th century. He showed its tensions, its social classes, and its contradictions. Leopoldo Alas, Clarín, with La Regenta, created one of literature's most impressive female portraits, akin to Emma Bovary and Anna Karenina. It's a devastating analysis of hypocrisy, frustration, and social pressure in a provincial town, Vetusta, which was a microcosm of Spain. Even in Latin America, this movement found fertile ground to denounce injustices. Naturalism served as a weapon to criticize the situation of indigenous populations, as Clorinda Matto de Turner did in Birds Without a Nest, one of the first indigenista novels. So as we see, realism and naturalism were not just a passing literary fad. They were a new way of looking at the world, one that demanded honesty, courage, and deep empathy for human beings. especially for those whom society preferred not to see. These writers taught us that literature can be a mirror, yes, but it can also be a hammer. A hammer to smash false appearances, to demolish prejudices, and to build a more just social conscience. They showed us that telling the truth is one of the most revolutionary acts there is. And if you think about it, that need for truth hasn't disappeared. On the contrary, today, in a world saturated with perfect images, fake news, and controlled narratives, we continue to search for those voices that dare to show us reality unadorned. Whether in a documentary, a series, a podcast, or a book, the spirit of realism and naturalism lives on every time an artist or journalist decides to focus on real problems: inequality, injustice, the struggles of everyday people. The legacy of Zola, Dickens, Dostoevsky is the conviction that telling stories can and must change the world. These literary movements invite us to be critical observers of our own time, to ask ourselves what stories are not being told, what realities we are ignoring. They encourage us to look for the human face behind the headlines and statistics, to understand the root causes of the problems that plague us. The next time you read a novel that makes you uncomfortable, that makes you feel the harshness of the world, remember these pioneers. They were the ones who opened the door for literature to cease being mere entertainment and become an essential tool for understanding the complexity of the human experience. They reminded us that fiction sometimes can tell a deeper truth than any official report, because it allows us to put ourselves in others' shoes, to feel their pain, to share their hopes, and ultimately to recognize our shared humanity in the midst of adversity. The industrial age forged the modern world with its bright spots and dark corners. And the literature of realism and naturalism gave us the language to understand it, to criticize it, and to dream of transforming it. An invaluable legacy that deserves to be remembered and above all read. It was an era where the written word was imbued with immense responsibility. It was no longer enough to entertain an idle elite. The realist writer felt the pulse of the streets, the urgency of social changes, and assumed a role almost like a chronicler, a sociologist, a witness to his time for history. Let's consider the objectivity they sought. Flaubert spoke of the author's impassivity, the idea that the narrator should be like God in his creation, present everywhere but visible nowhere. He wanted to eliminate his own voice so that reality could speak for itself without emotional or moral filters. This quest for objectivity led to an almost journalistic investigation. Before writing Germinal, Zola spent months in mining regions, descended into the mines, spoke with workers, and took exhaustive notes. He wanted every detail, from technical language to miners' slang, to be authentic. This dedication to factual truth is one of the great legacies they left to modern journalism and nonfiction. The idea that to tell a powerful story, you must first immerse yourself in it, investigate, verify. Credibility became the gold standard. Naturalism also explored the psychology of the masses. In novels like The Lady's Paradise, Zola analyzes the birth of department stores and how they seduced bourgeois women, creating a new religion of consumption. It's an incredibly modern analysis of advertising and desire. Furthermore, we cannot forget their critique of institutions. The church, the government, the judicial system, the institution of marriage, nothing escaped their critical gaze. They showed how these grand structures, which were supposed to be pillars of society, were often corrupt, hypocritical, and oppressive. This courage to challenge the status quo, the existing state of affairs, cost many of these authors dearly. They faced censorship, trials for immorality, and the scorn of official critics. But they did not stop because they believed in the power of their mission. It's also fascinating how language itself changed. They moved away from the poetic and ornate prose of Romanticism. Realistic and naturalistic language is direct, precise, sometimes even raw and vulgar if the situation required it. Style had to be at the service of truth, not beauty. And the influence extended to theater. Henrik Ibsen, the Norwegian playwright, brought realism to the stage with works like A Doll's House. Nora's final slamming of the door, as she leaves her husband and children to find herself, resonated throughout Europe like a gunshot announcing a new era for women. This focus on complex female characters and their struggles against a patriarchal society is another crucial legacy. Emma Bovary, Anna Karenina, Nora Helmer, La Regenta. All are tragic figures, but also rebels who, through their actions, challenged the roles assigned to them. The impact on visual arts was equally profound. Painters like Gustave Courbet in France led the realist movement in painting. His famous phrase, "Show me an angel and I'll paint one," encapsulates the movement's philosophy. He only painted what he could see, the lives of peasants and workers. In summary, realism and naturalism were not just a technique, but a new ethic for the artist. an ethic based on honesty, rigorous observation, and social responsibility. The artist was no longer a genius isolated in his ivory tower, but an active participant in the debates of his time. Let's think of the city as a character. In many of these novels, Paris, London, or Madrid are not just a backdrop. They are living, pulsating organisms that shape the lives of their inhabitants. With their rich and poor neighborhoods, their anonymous streets and their crowds, the city is both a cage and a battleground. This vision of the modern city as a maze of solitude and opportunity remains incredibly influential in contemporary cinema and literature. The figure of the detective walking through the rainy streets of a corrupt city is a direct descendant of the 19th century realist observer. Science, which was a great inspiration for naturalism, was also an object of its critique. They showed how scientific and technological progress without a moral compass could be dehumanizing. Factories that produced en masse also produced misery en masse. This tension between progress and humanity is perhaps more relevant today than ever. As we develop artificial intelligences and technologies that can change the world, the questions these authors asked are still ours. What does it mean to be human in an age of machines? At the end of the day, what makes these works so impactful is their profound humanity. Despite the determinism and the harshness, there is always a genuine interest in the inner lives of the characters. We feel their struggle even if they are doomed to failure, and in their defeat there is a strange form of dignity. These novels don't offer us easy answers or happy endings. They leave us with questions, with a sense of unease, with the awareness that the world is a complicated and often unjust place. And in that honesty lies their lasting power. So the next time you encounter the term realism in a textbook, don't think of something boring or dusty. Think of a group of rebels who, armed only with paper and ink, dared to face the beast of modernity head-on and tell what they saw, without fear. Their legacy teaches us that empathy is not born from looking away, but from observing carefully, from understanding the circumstances of others, and from recognizing that the forces that shaped their lives in some way continue to shape ours. They are a mirror that over a century later still reflects an uncomfortably familiar image back to us. It is fundamental to understand that this current was not an isolated phenomenon. Each country adapted realism to its own unique character. In Italy, Giovanni Verga's Verismo brutally portrayed the lives of fishermen and peasants in the South, showing an Italy far removed from the romantic postcards of Rome or Venice. Meanwhile, in Portugal, Eça de Queiroz, in The Crime of Father Amaro, used ironic and elegant prose to launch a stinging critique against the hypocrisy of the clergy and provincial life, a theme that, as we saw, obsessed realists across Europe. Even in Scandinavian literature, beyond Ibsen, authors like August Strindberg in Sweden pushed naturalism to extremes of pessimism and psychological analysis, exploring the war of the sexes and existential crises with an intensity that prefigured 20th century theater. What unites all these manifestations is a radical break with the past, a rejection of idealization and a commitment to the present. These writers took on the task of being the historians of the present, of documenting life as it happened, with all its contradictions. They didn't seek heroes, but human beings. They understood that in the life of an anonymous person, in their small battles and great failures, a universal truth could be found. The epic was no longer on the battlefield, but in the daily struggle for survival in a hostile city. This democratization of protagonism is, undoubtedly, one of their most revolutionary contributions. By focusing on common people, they affirm that all lives are worthy of being told, that all stories matter, an idea that seems obvious to us today, but which was radical in its time. The debate they opened about the function of art is still relevant. Should art be a refuge of beauty, an escape from harsh reality? Or should it be a tool for confrontation, a mirror that forces us to face what we would prefer to ignore? Realism and naturalism bet everything on the latter, and their influence is so profound that we often don't see it, like water to fish. Every time a film or series prides itself on its realism, on its raw portrayal of a profession or a social problem, it is drinking directly from the source these authors opened more than 150 years ago. They taught us to read the world as a text, to notice the details that reveal major power structures, to distrust official narratives. In short, they gave us tools to develop critical thinking that is absolutely indispensable today. Thus, looking back, we see not just a literary movement, we see a brave and necessary rebellion against blindness, a monumental attempt to capture the truth of an era of brutal changes, leaving for us an archive of the human condition at the crossroads of modernity. The next time you walk through a big city, notice the contrasts. The glass skyscrapers next to ancient buildings, the wealth and poverty coexisting just a few streets apart. You'll be seeing the same landscape that fascinated and horrified the realist writers. Their world is still our world. Literature, thanks to them, ceased to be a simple object of aesthetic pleasure and became a social document, a form of knowledge, an instrument to understand not only how things were, but why they were that way, and how the forces of history, economics, and biology shape us all. Perhaps the most important lesson they leave us is that truth, though often painful and difficult to accept, is always the only solid starting point for any real change. To improve the world, we first have to dare to see it as it is. That was their great and enduring contribution. In conclusion, realism and naturalism were much more than a simple literary technique. They were an ethical stance towards the world, an act of intellectual courage that consisted of holding a mirror up to a society that didn't want to see its own face. They showed us the scars, the grime, and the fractures, but in doing so, they also revealed the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Their legacy is a permanent invitation to not settle for appearances, to question the truths imposed upon us, and to seek humanity in the most unexpected places. They reminded us that the best stories are not those that allow us to escape reality, but those that help us understand it and, hopefully, transform it. An echo that resonates more powerfully than ever in our complex 21st century. The true power of these works lies in their ability to generate empathy. By forcing us to live page by page the life of a miner, a laundress, or a trapped woman, they compel us to abandon our comfortable position as spectators and to truly feel the weight of another's existence. That is the magic and the responsibility of great literature. This journey into the depths of the human condition is not always pleasant, but it is absolutely necessary. Because only by understanding the roots of injustice and suffering can we hope to build a more equitable future. The realists and naturalists knew this. They left us a map of their abysses so we could learn to navigate our own. Literature in their hands became a conscience for society, a voice that refused to be silenced, that shouted from the pages of books the truths the powerful preferred to hide. A reminder that art, when honest, is one of the most transformative forces we possess. In the end, the harshness of their mirror was not an act of cynicism, but an act of profound love for humanity. A love that doesn't settle for superficial beauty, but seeks truth in imperfection, strength in vulnerability, and hope in the darkest places. A lesson we must never forget. And indeed, the industrial society they described laid the groundwork for the globalized and technological world we live in. Their analyses of worker alienation, consumerism, and urban inequality have a chilling relevance today. Reading them is not just looking at the past, it's using a magnifying glass to understand our present. The next time you see a news report about the wage gap, the housing crisis, or labor exploitation, remember that Dostoevsky, Zola, and Galdós were already writing about the roots of those very same problems over a century ago. Their work is a testament that, even as technology changes, fundamental human struggles remain. So I invite you to rediscover these authors, not as an academic obligation, but as an intellectual adventure, as an opportunity to dialogue with some of history's most lucid and courageous minds who left us a legacy of truth and an unwavering faith in the power of words to illuminate the world. Thank you so much for joining me on this profound and, I hope, revealing journey through literature as a mirror of reality. It's been an honor to explore these ideas with all of you. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which author or work from this period has impacted you the most? Do you think we need more artists and writers with this level of commitment today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to keep uncovering history's hidden secrets.